Silent scan.
Underground grid connected. Please insert your passkey. Passkey accepted. Downloading payload.
I hate public speaking. I can't stand talking in front of people, let alone talking to people I can't even see. All right. Okay. I guess if I'm going to be dodging the flock's wrath to get these messages out, I can suck up my stage fright. Especially since I cannot, for the life of me, get a hold of anyone else. Although that could be because they're hiding, as their active nodes are still online. Or that could also mean Global Genesis captured them and left the nodes online so they can listen in. Oh, okay, that's grim. I'm sorry. See, this is why I hate public speaking. I just okay. You know what? No. You're not doing this. Moving on. To keep the underground grid's messaging alive, and to remind Global Genesis that no matter how hard they try to squash us like bugs, there will always be someone speaking out against their tyranny. So without further ado, I will continue reading the story that Lo and I experienced. So listener, if you're still out there and you're tuned in, just know you're not alone. We are here. We are the underground grid. And we're still sharing stories beneath the sprawl of Global Genesis. The truth lives here. The future is listening. The Operators, Part 2. Harlowe and I were silent as we moved through the forest. Like she always did, Harlowe carried the salvage bag, and I carried our pack of emergency supplies we'd hidden in the woods along the way. Though neither of us spoke a word about what happened on the train, it weighed heavily on our minds. Harlowe was always a little bit of a worrywart, no matter how grim or normal the situation, but the lifted set of her shoulders, the stiff way she scanned the forest, and the constant fidgeting of her fingers told me she was more on edge than usual. Harlowe glanced over her shoulders at me a couple of times, something in her expression hinting that she might have been expecting me to bring up the woman with the broken leg. I might have, if we weren't already beginning to race with the darkening sky. Harlowe hadn't complained about the weight of the salvage bag, but the way she held her body told me it was heavy. I'd been so caught up in our prospects that I hadn't fully accounted for the added burden. Now it was slowing us down, on a day we were already behind schedule. Beads of sweat gathered on the skin between her cropped black hair and the collar of her jacket. She kept moving, but I could hear her breathing grow more labored, the mist of each exhale becoming clearer as we made our way deeper into the wilds. We didn't take a break until we'd put at least a mile between us and the train tracks. Neither of us wanted to risk more than we had to. Lo dropped the salvage bag onto the forest floor and placed her hands on her hips, catching her breath. I took a bottle of water from my pack and took a sip before extending it to her. She accepted it, took a sip, then handed it back to me. Overhead, through the canopy of the giant wooden tree we stood beneath, the sky was beginning to darken, gold slowly giving way to a deeper shade of purple. A feeling of uneasiness began to seep in, and I fingered the straps of my pack before placing the water back inside. Maybe we should take out half, find a hiding spot, and come back for it, I suggested. Harlowe deliberated before looking skyward. Though she kept her face carefully controlled, her lips pursed ever so slightly. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I could tell we were thinking the same thing. We won't make it before dark either way, will we? My voice was surprisingly even as I tried not to think about what that sentence meant or how it went against the rules we had set for ourselves. Lo took a steadying breath before shaking her head in confirmation. A mess of thoughts and questions hit me at once. When the sun went down, we would have little to no visibility. Even if we managed to avoid whatever horrors lurked in the wilds at night, could we even find our way in the dark? Or would we become hopelessly lost trying to traverse the lands blind? I wondered if the risk of the salvage we were carrying would be worth the reward. Would we even survive to find out? I shoved down the panic that was quickly trying to climb its way to the surface of my awareness. Panic was useless. What we needed was a solution. I began racking my brain, but I came up short. This was not my area of expertise. I tried reframing my thoughts. If this were a machine, how would I fix it? But the fact of the matter was, this was not a machine. I had neither the tools or the knowledge of what to do in this situation. It occurred to me this was one of the few circumstances for which we had not made a contingency plan. The rule was clear: be back before dark. Never travel through the wilds at night. My mind snagged on the word travel. An idea seemed to tug at the recesses of my mind, slowly floating its way up to the surface. Maybe traversing the wilds wasn't the right strategy. Maybe what we needed to be doing was finding somewhere to lie low until we had sunlight to guide our way again. I looked to Lo, who seemed to already be a step ahead of me, but the way she was frowning up at the giant tree before us gave me an uneasy feeling. Even with her back half turned to me, I could see the gears turning in her head, see the gift she had for finding things, adapting to our current circumstances. "What are you thinking?" I asked, doing my best not to wince as I awaited her answer. Lo met my gaze. She opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted by an ear-splitting roar. Pain flooded my ears. I gritted my teeth, pressing my hands hard against the sides of my head in an attempt to muffle the sound. It did little to combat the high-pitched shrill. At first, I didn't register what happened. 1 second, I was standing. The next, my muscles seemed to convulse as all-encompassing pain erupted like electricity through my body. The next thing I was aware of was the cold feeling of mud seeping into my shaking gloved hands. I blinked. The forest floor came back into focus. "You okay?" Harlow's voice was low and shaky. It sounded muffled. I can barely hear her over the ringing of my own head. I met her concerned gaze and nodded. She scanned the forest. "I think it's gone. It sounded far off, but we better get moving." Slowly she got to her feet and closed the distance between us and extended a hand. I took it, coming to stand on my shaking feet. "What was that?" I asked, my hand instinctively pressing to my chest, my fingers pressed against the hardness beneath my jacket, and I relaxed a little. "I don't want to find out," she muttered, already digging in our supply bag, pulling out a rope. She unraveled a bit and cut off a few sections. "No, I don't mean the animal, I mean..." My voice trailed off. What did I even call that? Had Lo felt that jolt too? Or just me? Was it because of the item I had hidden beneath my jacket? Harlowe paused, still crouched, and looked up at me with a serious face. I could tell there was something she wasn't telling me. I gave her an expectant look. "I've heard rumors," she began. "Some of Fence's friends are part of the underground grid. They've heard stories from other provinces." "What kind of stories?" I asked slowly, hoping I wasn't going to regret asking. Harlow's gaze shifted to her right arm before returning to mine. "I didn't hear the whole thing, but I guess there was some civil unrest in the southern province a few months back. Global Genesis was able to activate the nerves in people's bodies using their Genesis cards. It simultaneously incapacitated the entire crowd with the press of a button. My guess, whatever that thing does, is the same when it makes that sound." I stared at her, but she began digging in her bag again, pulling out a belt we collected to use as an emergency tourniquet. I watched Harlow zip the bag before flinging it over one shoulder. She fastened the belt around her waist and began to unravel the rope. "You have a plan?" I asked. Lo met my inquisitive gaze and nodded. "You're not going to like it," she said flatly. I crossed my arms, but I tried to keep my face neutral. I waited for her to elaborate. She was now fastening one end of the rope to the belt with expert fingers. "It will be dark soon. My guess is whatever that thing is can see in the dark better than we can, but I doubt it can climb," she said, turning towards the giant tree before us. Suddenly, it clicked. The rope, the belt, the tree. Lo had found a way to make the camp off the ground. "Open your eyes." Lo was admonishing where she stood on the ground below several minutes later as I hugged a tree branch for dear life. My body was shaking so hard the leaves were rustling above my head. "Jenny, you won't fall. Just a bit higher." and you're done. I tried to focus on Harlow's voice, repeating her 2 sentences like a mantra in my head. Just a little bit higher and you're done. Just a little bit higher. I sucked in a breath and forced my eyes open. It was an effort not to hyperventilate. I hadn't looked down. I didn't need to. The view of the trees gave me a good enough idea of how high up I must be. I cursed under my breath and forced myself to move, sliding my foot along the uneven surface of the branch below me. There's a knot above your head. To your right. Grab hold. I did as Harlowe instructed, staring up so hard into the bark of the tree, I could feel myself going cross-eyed. There's a broken branch to your right. Use it as a step and hoist yourself up that big branch above. I did as I was told, finding the step with fumbling precision and wincing when the movement caused the smuggled contraband beneath my jacket to dig painfully into my side. Once I was sure of my footing, I put down my weight. I could feel the light tug of the belay rope around my waist as Lowe pulled it, taut with my ascent. It should have made me feel more secure. It didn't. I managed to pull myself onto the crook of branches in a series of maneuvers that must have been the most ungraceful bit of climbing anyone had ever seen, doing my best to spare the electronics beneath my jacket, the brunt of my full weight. Harlowe continued to call out instructions, her voice becoming squeaky in the moments my flailing around made her nervous, belay rope or not. When Lowe was convinced I was settled into the crook of the tree well enough so as not to fall, she had me untie the rope and toss it down to her. Even in the dim light, the height was dizzying. Well, you got me up here. You have no idea how you're going to get me down, I mused. I watched as she threw the rope around another tree branch. Then, she immediately began tying the rope around the bag. One problem at a time, she replied, pulling the knot tight. I frowned as she began to pull, lifting the bag into the air until it came to float, not far from my feet. You're really worried about things getting stolen? All the way out here? She didn't look at me as she untied the rope from her belt and tied it off around the trunk of a nearby tree. Then she crossed her arms and looked up at me with a single raised brow. Come on, Jenny, give me a bit more credit than that, she quipped before making her way to the base of the trunk. The climb that must have taken me the better part of 10 minutes was completed by Lowe in under 1. I narrowed my eyes as she settled herself on the other side of the crook of branches. She caught me glaring, and I shoved my glasses up my nose in an attempt to hide my irritation. She ignored the look, pulling a bit of rope from her pocket. The bag is heavy, she said simply, using the rope to secure me to the branch. Now it was my turn to raise a brow. When she completed her knots, she looked up at me and grinned mischievously. Especially on an unsuspecting head, she added triumphantly. I snorted. We better hope that unsuspecting head is on this side of the tree, or we are both monster bait. I had meant that to be funny, but somehow both of our smiles were quickly fading along with the last vestiges of light. A shiver slid down my spine, and I realized how cold I suddenly was now that I wasn't moving. Hey, Lowe said quietly. We're going to be fine. I nodded at her as reassuringly as I could. You should rest. I'll keep watch first. Lowe nodded, pulling the tarp from her pack and spreading it over us both as best she could. Then, she tied her own safety rope before settling in. Soon, she was still. The wilds were exceptionally dark at night and eerily quiet. Though the tarp helped keep some body heat, the flockman had been right. The temperature had dropped. Even in the dark, I could see a faint outline of my breath, and I never could quite get to a comfortable temperature. I wasn't sure how cold it had to be to catch hypothermia, but I knew it snuck up on those who were sleeping. Every now and then, when the idea made me grow nervous, I'd squint at Lowe in the dark and listen intently until I heard her gentle breathing. Sometimes I even nudged her gently with my foot until she moved, just to be sure. I wondered if Dad had done the same on cold winter nights, when the power went out and we were all huddled around the fire. My chest tightened, and I hugged the laptop beneath my jacket. Dad. I missed him. A tinge of guilt tugged at the pit of my stomach as my fingers curled around the laptop edges. I knew how mad Lo would be when she found out I still had it. And she would find out. Lo had a gift for finding things. With a gift like that, it made hiding anything for a period of time difficult. But I had made a promise, and I intended to keep it. I'd messed up that night Dad was taken for correction. I hadn't realized what connecting to the Genesis network on an unauthorized computer would mean for us if I got caught. Because I was still under 16 at the time, Dad ended up getting the brunt of my mistake. He returned from correction, battered and bruised, with 4 broken ribs, and the tattooed mark of Strike 1 imprinted on a single line on his right wrist. It took 3 whole days before he was well enough to speak. I'd expected him to be angry with me, to give me a lecture on the importance of my well-being. Instead, I was shocked the day he called me into his room to speak with me, alone. Dad's breathing was labored. He winced when he sat up. I offered to help him, but he waved me away. His words were slow, and I can tell it was great effort for him to simply speak. Did you learn anything? Aside from the clear pain in his face, there was no hint to his feelings or his tone. It was hard to meet his gaze. His face was a mess of bruises, and his one eye was almost swollen shut. My hands fidgeted at my sides. My fault. It was my fault for what they did to him. Jenny, he said gently, look at me and answer my question. I blinked at him. I could feel my throat begin to tighten. I'm sorry, I blurted. I. He motioned for me to sit beside him, so I did. I didn't ask for an apology, Jen, he said with what seemed like infinite patience. Did you learn anything? I won't do it again, I said quickly. Promise. He frowned, clearly displeased with that answer. He shook his head. Jen, he began again, if you never do it again, then they win. I blinked at him, my mouth gaping open. What? What did you learn about their systems? He asked with a bit more forceful tone. If you did it again, could you avoid the same mistake? I stared at him in shock. My mouth was moving, but nothing was coming out. So I nodded once instead. That seemed to calm him a bit. His posture relaxed a little. My mind was racing as pieces began to come together. You knew, I accused. His expression didn't change. I don't know your reason for doing it, and it's probably best if it stays that way. But I believe if anyone's going to learn something about the Genesis network that could change things, it's you, Jenny. You have a gift. We fight back where we can, when we can. Promise me that's what you're going to continue to do. I just stared at my father, utterly speechless. He took my hand in his. Promise me, he insisted at my silence. I nodded quickly. I promise, Dad. I promise. I intended to keep that promise, and I vowed to one day make that trip to correction count for something more than just a rookie mistake. If it weren't for the fear of what the light of the laptop might attract, I'd be looking at it right now, picking up where I left off. The distant rustle on the ground below had my body going rigid. I strained my eyes. At first, there was nothing. Then the rustling continued. It was the sound of a clumsy footfall. Footfall of a person who was seriously injured. This is Angela Lamantia. We hope you have enjoyed this production of The Operators Part 2 by Blake C. Holloway, with the operator intro written by Angela Lamantia. This program was produced by B. Holla Entertainment, directed and edited by Angela Lamantia, narrator Angela Lamantia, text copyright 2025 by Blake C. Holloway, production copyright 2025 by B. Holla Entertainment, all rights reserved. This is a copyrighted work. Unauthorized copying or distribution is a crime. We'll see you next week.